It was like a gigantic paint by numbers, only in the style of Tiepolo. It looked clumsy from close up, but from the floor it looked like old Giambattista did it yesterday. It had that don't-give-a-shit ease in it. True sprezzatura. Total authority laying down the paint, like I'd been doing Tiepolesque frescoes every day of my life. In the center, the Virgin exalted, the most important part. I took the liberty of giving her Lottie's face. Nice Jewish girl, after all. Or at least the Rothschild half. And why not? I'm sure Tiepolo stuck his honeys on ceilings all over Europe. About 3 weeks into the project, say the middle of November, I got a surprise visit from my ex-father-in-law. I mean Lottie's father, not the side of beef one. He was in Venice for a conference. Interesting guy, pushing 80 now, but still active. Had a long career in the UN diplomatic service, then moved on to art scholarship. Calls himself an amateur, but he's written a lot. Apparently quite respected in European art history circles. Not one of those Rothschilds, as he likes to say. Consequently went through a rough time as a kid, lost his family to the Nazis, and survived by being sheltered in a convent in Normandy. Married an Italian woman. She had the one kid and then died, cancer, when Lottie was about 12. He never remarried. Lottie had told him where I was, and I sensed that his visit was in the nature of an inspection tour. I didn't mind. I kind of wanted to know how I was, too. We had lunch at a little hole-in-the-wall place he likes near the Palazzo Grimani, a slow Venetian meal. I asked him how Lottie and the kids were. He said, "The children are wonderful as always. They miss you. Rose believes that Big Italy, as she calls it, is on the subway somewhere near Little Italy. She has her own Metro card now and threatens to come and visit you when she feels like it. Milo, well, what can one say? He is melancholy after this last relapse, but he has a tremendous brightness and courage that keeps breaking through. He says he hopes to live long enough to see you again." Shit. Yes, life is sometimes shit. Lottie is holding up despite... Perhaps you haven't heard. Jackie Moreau is dead. What? Oh God, how? Murdered in Rome. Stabbed and dumped in the river. The police believe it was a robbery gone wrong. Christ. She must be devastated. Yes. He must be her oldest friend, you know. As I say, life is sometimes shit, but we are obliged to keep living. Tell me about the work you're doing here. I was happy to change the subject, and we talked about Tiepolo for a while. He said it was a shame I'd not had a chance to see the frescoes in the Prince Bishop's Palace in Würzburg, which were, in his opinion, the best things the artist had ever done. "I suppose your next project will be something by the Guardis," he said with a smile. "Why the Guardis?" "Didn't you know? Tiepolo married Francesco Guardi's daughter. His sons, Giovanni Domenico and Lorenzo, both became pretty fair painters. One of the few cases where talent bred true, and isn't this one of the great conundrums of human existence? From whence it comes. I, for example, have a passionate love of painting, but it would never occur to me to try to paint. Or rather, it did occur to me, unfortunately. After the war, I spent an unhappy year in art school, until it became clear that I would never amount to anything in that line. And Lottie, too, as you know, tried her hand, and the anti-talent was also inherited. Poor child. And you, of course, are the counterexample. I'd say the counterexample. I inherited a load of talent from a man who never used what he'd been given properly. And guess what? I don't use it properly either. You are blocked. I am blocked. At that moment I almost spilled it. The whole horror of what had happened in New York. The fancy loft, the Enso gallery, the loft door that wouldn't open, the falsification of memory. Because if anyone I knew, Maurice Rothschild would have been the person most likely to understand it. But I didn't. Why not, Chaz? Why didn't you unburden yourself to this enormously charitable and knowledgeable man? Maybe there would have been a great vomiting out of the blockage then. He'd be my magician lifting the curse with a subtle word. But the truth is, we love our dark stuff. We hug it to our inner hearts, even as it corrodes our vitals. I confess it. Just like with Slotsky, I was simply too fucking terrified to ask. Instead, I laughed a fake chuckle and said, "But what can I do? At least I'm making money." "Not to be sneezed at," he said after a decent pause. "Let's have some coffee and a little grappa, and then we'll go see your ceiling." Which we did in due course, and when he saw it, looking up with the spotting scope I used to check the paint from the ground, he laughed and said, "That's marvelous. A little artistic joke. You have captured precisely my girl." "You think she'll mind?" "On the contrary, she'll be delighted." "I thought she didn't like artistic jokes." "That would depend on the joke and its context. Artistic jokes are amusing only against a serious background. Mozart wrote a musical joke, but Mozart is easily distinguishable from Spike Jones. This," here he gestured upward, "is astounding. I see the paint is still fresh, but I would be hard-pressed not to call it the work of the master. And it's not merely the composition, which of course you had from the cartoons. It's the colors, that glorious shot silk effect, and the delicacy of the drawing and the details, that marvelous line he has, or you have. It is a consummate forgery. In fact, I believe it is, all told, the very best artistic forgery I have ever seen, and I have seen a few." "Really? When?" "Oh, it was something I did in my early career. I had the degree in art history, perfectly useless, I thought, for a diplomat, economics, political science far more the thing, and if history, one wants the history of rulers and their elaborate murders, wars, and so forth. But someone in the ministry must have examined dossiers because I was picked to participate in the negotiations around returning artworks looted by the Third Reich. This was in, I believe, 1956. Of course, the great troves, the most famous works stolen by Goering and the big gangsters, had already been returned. But the scale of the looting was so vast. I mean, an enormous proportion of the cultured class in Germany and the conquered lands was despoiled, not to mention museums in places like the Netherlands and France and Poland. Not only the Jews, who of course lost everything, but liberals and socialists of every stripe. I mean to say, if you have a regime that is essentially lawless, anyone with a pretension to power can take anything he wants from anyone designated as an enemy of the state. So what did you do? Well, the apologetic powers established an office in Paris, and there someone would come, let's say a French Jew who survived, and place a claim. I had a Cézanne, I had a Rubens, and the Germans came and they're gone. And then the police, let us say, locate the Germans who were in this man's area, and they look, and sure enough, former Hauptführer SS Schultz has a Cézanne stashed away in his attic, the Frenchman's very Cézanne, or so it seems. But since this was an international body, and very correct, it must make sure it is the same painting, and that the Frenchman really owned it, and so forth. And for this they need an art historical diplomat. And this is me. Now Herr Schultz has done his time in prison, perhaps 3 years, because after all he only killed 100 Jews instead of 100,000, and he is participating in the German reconstruction, and he wishes very much to hold on to the painting, which he intends to sell at some point to expand his business. And so he cleverly decides to hire some art student to copy it, and someone must be on hand to catch him at his tricks. And again, this is me. "Gosh, I didn't know any of this," I said. "Did this happen a lot?" "No, because as I'm sure you know, forgery is difficult, and these people were no great connoisseurs in the main. The efforts to deceive were generally quite childish." He smiled and jerked his thumb upward. "I'm grateful you were not in business at that time." And now something made me think of the conversation I'd had with Mark about art forgery. Maybe the word business triggered some neuron too, and I asked him, "Did you ever hear of someone in the art business named Krebs?" At the mention of this name, the familiar genial expression vanished from his face, and for a moment I saw replacing it the mask of the diplomat he'd probably worn to work for 30 years. "You are referring to Horst Axel Krebs?" I said, "No, I think his name is Werner." "The son, then." "Why do you ask?" So I told him about Slotsky mentioning the connection between this fresco job and Krebs. He listened in silence, and then said, "Let's take a walk. I want to take a look at the San Zaccaria Bellini again." We left the palazzo and walked south on Corte Rota in the chill rain that keeps the tourists scant in Venice's winter between Christmas and Carnival, and makes the uneven streets reflect, canal-like, the colored stonework of the great facades. As we walked, he said, "So let me tell you about Herr Krebs. First the father, Horst Axel Krebs. Like me and Hitler, a failed artist. He was young enough to miss the First War, and after a bohemian youth in Munich, he set up as an art dealer there in 1923. In 1928 he joined the Nazi Party, and after the Nazis took power, he was made a curator at the Alte Pinakothek in the place of a removed Jew. By this time he is married and has a son, Werner Horst, born 1933.